On August 25th, 1974, along the Rio Grande River, near the Texas border town, a explosion in the sky shattered the stillness on a summer night, and an unidentified flying disc traveling about 2,000 miles per hour collided with a small airplane headed south from El Paso, Texas. The flaming wreckage of both aircraft fell to the Mexican desert and immediately became the object of intense recovery efforts by the military forces from both Mexico and the United States. This is a very, very interesting story, and that is what we are going to be talking about tonight. So, what I'd like to do now is I'd like to introduce you to my two guests, Ruben and Noe. Ruben, Noe, you both there?
I'm right here.
All right, let's see if we can get Jimmy to adjust some levels here. There we go. All right. Now, I myself, personally, has just kind of started to learn about this story. So, tell me a little bit more about the incident itself.
Do you want me to talk about it a little bit there, Noe, and then you jump in, or do you want to go ahead and...
Well, the way it happened, Jack, was in August 1974, as you mentioned, there was an object that basically dropped in out of the upper atmosphere into the Gulf of Mexico, just off the coast of Texas, a little bit south of Houston, in the area of Corpus Christi, which is one of the larger port cities there in South Texas. And this was picked up by military radar installations along the Texas Gulf Coast. It suddenly appeared on radar screens, and it started moving in a general direction toward the Texas coast. As you can imagine, 1974, we were still in the Cold War period, and it raised a lot of alarm bells. There were preparations made to scramble some jets. And the object moved very quickly. It was topping out at over 2,000 miles per hour speed, and it was at a very high altitude, several thousand feet, actually about 50,000 feet when it was first spotted. And as everybody watched very tensely, the military people were watching that, the object suddenly streaked and turned toward the south, headed toward Brownsville, Texas, which is very close to where I'm speaking from tonight here. I'm located just about 10 miles from Mexico here in South Texas and not far from Brownsville. So the radar continued to track it as it zoomed past Brownsville, and then it did about a 90-degree turn, just a little south of Brownsville, 90-degree turn right into northern Mexico. Then it zoomed right across some of the less populated areas of northern Mexico, basically at a lot of desert and mountainous area in northwestern and northern Mexico there, and it ended up, as you mentioned in the opening remarks, it crashed with apparently it crashed with that small airplane that had taken off about an hour earlier from El Paso. According to the intelligence that we've received, the radar indicated that the two blips on the radar screen suddenly merged into one and then disappeared. And that was when the excitement began after that, as both the U.S. and Mexico made a very concerted and rapid decision to go in there and try to retrieve that wreckage.
Interesting. Now, this aircraft that it collided with, who was on board this aircraft?
Well, we really don't know yet there, Jack. We know that it left out of El Paso. And by the way, all this information came from a report known as the Deneb report. And what we believe, it's a group of military insiders that were monitoring UFO activity, and this was a communication between themselves. And the word Deneb, actually, we were looking it up, and we found out that the word Deneb is a name after a star system. So this was their way of communicating, and what we found was in the report that this plane was leaving out of El Paso, going toward Mexico City. As Noe had mentioned, that then this object struck the airplane approximately around 10:30 at night, based on the report. And then when the object had crashed, well, a Mexican retrieval team was sent out to find the wreckage of the airplane, but what they discovered was they found a disc-shaped object that was nearly intact. The object was approximately about 16.5 feet in diameter, about 5 feet in height, and they found that there was slight damage. Well, what happened there is that as they were discovered the disc as well as the plane, all this was being monitored by U.S. military spy satellites and reconnaissance aircraft. The CIA was definitely monitoring this entire effort here. Mm-hmm. And so the story gets a little bit more bizarre when as a retrieval team from Mexico had gathered both the debris of the plane as well as the disc.
So this thing traveling at 2,000 miles per hour collides with a plane, and it's almost completely intact?
Well, it was initially traveling at over 2,000 miles per hour. However, it was in a descending and slowing down mode right around the time that the collision occurred. It had slowed quite a bit, and the reports that we received about the condition of the small airplane is that it was basically completely destroyed, mm-hmm. and only small fragments were recovered by the Mexican recovery team. The ship itself, the disc-shaped object itself, sustained two major points of impact. However, it was obvious that it was made of material that could withstand a lot more in the way of damage than the conventional airplane could.
Right. Wow. Yeah, I mean, that would be like a missile hitting that plane.
Yes, well, we've heard of other interesting reports of near collisions with objects that had collided with airplanes, and this is this particular story here, Jack. It gets even more bizarre as we'll get into it. But what we found, based on the Deneb report, was as they were monitoring the Mexican retrieval efforts, the Mexicans were then leaving in a large truck convoy, heading back, and then that's when they noticed the truck convoy had completely stopped, and then upon closer examination, they found a number of Mexican soldiers that were lying dead around the vehicles.
Oh.
Which then alerted a retrieval team out of Fort Bliss. They were a group of helicopters, an arsenal of three Huey type helicopters and a massive Sea Stallion that was sent out of El Paso, flying along the ridge around the Texas border. Now, Noe's from Texas. He knows that area really well, and Noe, maybe you may want to talk about the terrain and that part of Texas there.
Yeah, I just want to pop in and say, born and raised here along the Rio Grande River here in South Texas, and very familiar with the areas that are mentioned in the Deneb report, is what really immediately brought to my attention that there was, in my mind, a high level of credibility in the information contained therein, because of the fact that it mentions specific areas of the state of Texas. It talks about relative distances between points. Mm-hmm. And a lot of these areas that it mentions don't even appear on general types, more general types of maps. I mean, right. You have to have some really specific knowledge of the area. And so one of the first things that Ruben and I did when we were investigating this case was we plotted out all the points that were involved, all the geographic locations that were mentioned in the Deneb report. We also calculated the flight speed of the various aircraft that were mentioned, mm-hmm. and everything that we looked at, everything that we plotted on a map just came out just exactly the way it would, and that's why we early on attributed a high level of credibility to this.
Now, what in that particular area, what other airports, or how does the radar tracking work of just normal airports in the area, these small airports? Would they be able to, what airport did it take off from? It took off from San Antonio, did you say?
It took off from El Paso International Airport, which is one of the largest ones in the West Texas area. Also interesting, Jack, to note that these are not small airports that we're tracking it along the Texas-Mexico border. These are some large-scale military radar installations that have been in place since the 1940s.
Oh.
We've got major military radar installations all along the border, from Corpus Christi, where the object was first picked up, on down to South Texas, the Rio Grande Valley, up to Laredo. Del Rio has a major military presence, and on up toward El Paso. So, I mean, we're talking about big military radar tracking stations, especially active during this Cold War period of the early 70s.
Right.
Especially the state of Texas, there are so many number of military bases and Air Force bases all along from
in addition, a lot of electronic surveillance due to the fact that drug trafficking and illegal immigration was, as it is today, was a big problem along the Texas-Mexico border. So there had been a lot of military radar and electronic surveillance put into place. One of the largest electronic surveillance centers in the United States, one of the largest, was located at Fort Bliss in El Paso, Texas, which was only about 100 miles from where this mid-air collision is said to have taken place. So, I mean, we're talking about a very well-monitored and area with lots of surveillance and radar.
Now, I'm sure on an incident like this, the first thing any government agency would want to do is try and keep it as under the covers as possible. But with these other airports and radar tracking, isn't the radar tracking usually recorded to where you can go back and you can pull the tapes of what the radar...
That's a very good question. It's a very good question, and we've made a lot of inquiries to the Department of Defense. We've tried to obtain those records, and we have been told, and I have a letter here in front of me that says that those records are not, supposedly, those records are not kept more than 10 years. And that's the official response that we've gotten from the Department of Defense.
I see. And when did you actually start diving into and investigating this?
Well, Ruben actually beat me to it, and he was already on the case when I first got into it. So, Ruben, why don't you mention how you came across it, and then we'll talk about how we got together on the book.
Just to give you a little background, I'm the state director for Northern California MUFON, and as you know, we're one of the largest organizations in terms of investigations.
Right.
And we also, I was contacted by our international director, John Schuessler, at the time, and now we have Mr. James Carrion, who's our current director. Mr. Schuessler had told me that he was contacted by a production company, and they were interested in doing investigations and connections with with UFOs in Mexico. And at that time, I was involved with a group of researchers in Mexico. They were developing a national organization, and so what I did was I put them in contact. I put the production company in contact with the Mexican researchers. Well, what I found out later was that the History Channel was doing a whole series of Roswell-type crashes, and they came out with a series like the Brazil's Roswell, England's Roswell, just about China's Roswell. They kept going on, and then they indicated that they were going to focus on the whole crash in Coyame, which I was familiar with, based on some of the information that came out on the internet, as well as I think Ryan Wood had written a book on crash retrievals in MJ12 documents and that.
Right.
So they did a documentary, and they had asked me to go ahead and be a part of the commentary there, and that's when Mr. Noe Torres had saw the documentary, and then he had later contacted me and said, "Hey, I would like to get some more information as I'm doing some research about UFOs in South Texas and that." And then later, as we started collaborating, then he indicated, let's work together on this project, develop a book out of it. And Jack, I mean, we have come across some some extraordinary finds since we've been working together on this book.
So that kind of makes sense whenever they say, well, we don't have any of those radar records because they were destroyed. They don't want to keep them after 10 years. So by the time you got into this, that explanation or that excuse that they don't have that kind of hampered with getting any type of radar.
Exactly, Jack. The problem that we have here, as in the 1947 UFO crash near Roswell, we had the time element working against us. The crash occurred in 1974. The information about the crash really did not begin to surface until the early 90s.
Oh.
So there was a considerable period of time there, about 16, 17 years had passed. So it was already too late if what the DOD is telling us in terms of how long they keep information about significant targets detected by radar, if it's correct, we were already behind the cue ball on that. Interesting to note is I was doing, as Ruben mentioned, I was doing research on UFO-related cases in Texas at the time that I first heard about this incident that had occurred there that we're talking about tonight. And one of the most interesting pieces of research that had been done previously was by the late Len Stringfield, famous for his research into a number of UFO crash retrieval cases.
Mm-hmm.
And Len had heard about the crash at Coyame, there along the West Texas-Mexico border, and he was very intrigued by it. He stated in one of his newsletters that he felt it was a highly credible document, the Deneb report, which we've been referring to, and the elements that make up this case. He found it to be very intriguing. Unfortunately, he passed away shortly after that, so he never had a chance to follow up on that.
Right.
Yeah. Just to go along with that, Noe had mentioned Leonard Stringfield. Also, that report was disseminated to other UFO researchers back in the early 90s. We had another researcher by the name of Elaine Douglas who was involved in Operations Right to Know and with a number of other key researchers, and she had received anonymously this document, and this is how we started finding about it. Well, then later this document was posted on the internet about the Deneb report and its findings. But the story gets even more bizarre there, Jack. What we found was, based on the report, that the military team arriving from Fort Bliss, they were wearing biohazard suits.
Yeah, that was going to be actually my next question. I mean, after the convoy was discovered to be dead, surely the Mexican government noticed their convoy was gone. So what happened diplomatically? I mean, if that's what they died of, if they're going in there, I mean, I'm sure there's going to be some sort of, even radiation from something that high in the atmosphere moving that fast, or just with the recovery protocols that were outlined, like in the Majestic 12. I mean, they even kind of outline things of that nature.
It gets a little complicated here, and we're going to have to go back a little earlier. As Noe and I were doing a number of research, we found that there was a number of other crashes that also had occurred along the Texas-Mexican border. And one of the questions we've been trying to do further research is, what is the relationship with the U.S. military, CIA, with the Mexican government, as well as the Mexican military.
Mm-hmm.
And then in that, we also started finding out the whole thing about, correct me, let's see, Operation Blue, what is it? I lost my mind here.
You're talking about moon dust, right?
Moon dust, yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. It's 7:30, 8 o'clock my time here. Go ahead, sir. Moon dust, yes. But what we were finding out was that the U.S. had a policy where they were monitoring satellites from the Soviet Union, from Russia, basically,
actually any type of space debris. The U.S. had plans in place for immediate recovery, The U.S. really was the world leader at that time and continues to be so in terms of immediately responding to being an immediate responder to events where debris comes down from outer space, and is often present at the recovery of such objects at the behest of the authorities, be it another country or another jurisdiction. Obviously, in the 1970s, Mexico did not have any such well thought out plan in place. They did not have the gear or the equipment to deal with this, and for a long time afterward did not have that. So what happened, we don't know behind the scenes what happened. The Deneb report says that the U.S. attempted to obtain official permission from Mexico to intervene because the incident had occurred so close to the Texas border. We estimate that we were talking about within 30 miles of Texas is where this event occurred, and up to 24 Mexican soldiers lost their lives through some unknown agent that could possibly mean a biological or chemical or other form of contamination. So obviously there was a great amount of interest going on the part of the U.S. military to intervene in this process, and they did.
Well, how did the Mexican military and government actually respond whenever we jumped up and said, hey, you want some help with this?
The initial response, Ruben, was, as Ruben can elaborate on in a minute, but the initial response was that they had only a plane. They denied that there was anything but a plane crash, and that they were going to handle it themselves.
Exactly, and the other operation now that it was Blue Fly, Moon Dust and Blue Fly, which is what Noe had elaborated on during the Cold War, where we're monitoring any space debris or satellites there. But again, what we were finding out through our research, that there was another crash that had occurred back in 1948 in the nearby town of Laredo, but on the Mexican side, and there was another crash that was indicated in the MJ-12 documents in Del Rio, right off on the Mexican side back in 1950. And then we're now uncovering another case that we'll talk to you more on, and it's really another book that we're developing called The Other Roswell, of a crash that occurred back in 1954-55. But
so
what we're finding...
I think the point is that there was already a precedent for U.S. recovery of crashed objects in northern Mexico along the border. There had even been a number of U.S. Missiles and experimental aircraft that had gone down in that area of northern Mexico, and the U.S. had sometimes through official channels and other times not so official channels had received permission to go in there and retrieve the wreckage from those missile and test aircraft crashes. So, but there was procedures in place through Moon Dust and Blue Fly. There was precedent that similar events had happened in the 40s, 50s, and on through the 70s. There had been several events where the U.S. military had gone in and retrieved crashed objects.
Jack, along with that, Noe mentioned the missiles that were being tested. The V-2 rocket program, that was through Operation Paperclip, where they brought over the German scientists and technicians that work on the V-2s, and they were tested out of Fort Bliss. Right. And these rockets, we had two incidents where these back in 1947, where two V-2s had gone astray and had crashed right on the other side of the border into Juarez. And then we had another incident that actually really close to the Coyame area in 1967, where we had a missile that was launched and had crashed near the Coyame area. And then we had another one that was an Athena rocket that was launched out of Utah, and it also crashed near in what's known as the Zone of Silence. Some people consider it as Mexico's Bermuda Triangle area. It's a desert area, but this had radiation contamination. So here you had excuses for U.S. obviously personnel to go into Mexican territory to retrieve U.S. assets. But as it turns out, that you could have a UFO crash, and then the government could say it's one of ours. It's one of our planes or missiles.
Well, as a matter of fact, hold right there. We got to take a quick break, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that, because something tells me that if it was not for the fact that Roswell was hit the papers like it did, if there wasn't so many eyewitnesses, we might have not have found out about Roswell even until many years later, much like this incident.
Exactly.
All right, stick around. Don't go away. We'll be right back. This is Paranormal Radio. I'm your host, Captain Jack, and tonight we're talking about the other Roswells. Welcome back, everybody. This is Paranormal Radio. I am your host here for the next 2 hours and 50 minutes. And tonight we're talking about Mexico's Roswell. My guests tonight are Ruben and Noe from the book Mexico's Roswell. Welcome back, fellas.
Yeah,
thank you there, Jack.
Glad to be here.
So, okay, where we left off, and I know that there is tons to this story. I don't even think that in the 3 hours that we have, we could even cover all of it. But a couple of questions actually came through during the break from listeners that they're really intrigued about the death of the military personnel.
Yeah.
Like, for instance, one question was from Jerry in St. Louis, is how close was this convoy to the actual wreckage?
All right, this is a very interesting question. Ruben and I have spent a lot of time down and in the area. The crash occurred near a tiny Mexican town called Coyame. It's in the state of Chihuahua. Mm-hmm. Population 611 people. We've talked to a number of folks in the area, including a gentleman who was living very near where this crash is said to have occurred. He remembers hearing a series of explosions. Although he didn't record the exact date that it happened, he does remember that it was 1974, and it was late at night when he heard this happen. We've done a lot of field work in the area. In fact, we just returned a few weeks ago with a production crew and cast from the History Channel. Mm-hmm. We just wrapped a documentary with them on this incident, which one of the neat things about it, just momentarily as an aside, one of the neat things about it is that it's very much of a developing UFO story, sort of like what the Roswell case was in the early 1970s. Mm-hmm. This case, this Coyame UFO crash, is just in its infancy. A lot of people are looking into it, and there's a great deal of interest. The death of the Mexican soldiers is one of the most intriguing parts of the story. Obviously, they were exposed to something that was either chemical, biological, or it could have been a form of radiation that caused their death. And so, Ruben, do you want to? We haven't really even gotten to that part of the story about what happened following the death of the Mexican soldiers. So, Ruben, you want to just jump in there and follow on through with that? The area of Coyame, and one of the things that was really interesting is that it's about, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong here, Noe, about 40, 50 miles from the border, from Presidio? Yeah, it's between 30 and 40 miles. 30 and 40 miles from the borders, and the U.S. retrieval team that flew out of Fort Bliss, they cut across, which is mentioned in the Deneb report, a small town named Candelaria, Texas. Mm-hmm. And if you were to look on the map, as our listeners look on the Texas map, they'll see along the west side of Texas the mountain ranges that Noe was talking about. But what happened was that when they arrived, they gathered the debris, they gathered the soldiers, the vehicles, and what they did was with the Sea Stallion helicopter, they
were able to carry away the UFO. I mean, the disc, and they took it toward an area called the Davis Mountains off of West Texas. But in the meantime, after they removed the object, the soldiers and all the remaining evidence was destroyed. They basically used high explosives, and so that's one. This is based on the report. But one of the things, going back to what Noe was mentioned about biological contamination, and that one of the things that we were really interested in knowing is that there's a lot more information. But what we found was they took the object to Atlanta, Georgia. And what's in Atlanta, Georgia there, Jack? What makes Atlanta, Georgia so famous?
Coca-Cola.
And the gambling casinos, right?
Exactly.
A lot of the UFO researchers, when the Deneb report first was made public in the early 90s, were asking themselves the question, why Atlanta? I mean, traditionally, among UFO researchers, there's been a lot of military bases around the country that have been identified as places where UFOs are taken, following a crash retrieval. But Atlanta has never been a hotspot for that sort of activity that anybody knew about.
Right.
But of course, being the area where the Center for Disease Control is located, and in the 70s, it was the premier. It contained the premier laboratory facilities for dealing with biological contaminants of the kind that was suspected, at least suspected at one point in this incident. It makes sense when you stand back and look at the overall picture that Atlanta might be the place where the material from this crash was taken to probe for any possible existing, contamination still existing in there.
Right. On a side note there, Jack, this is something that it's so interesting to me. Do you remember the movie The Dramatist Strain?
Mm-hmm.
That film, or that movie, was made back in 1971, I believe. It was filmed in a little town called Shafter. And both Noe and I, actually Noe took me to the little town, and that's about, 20 miles outside of Presidio, is that, Noe?
Very close in this area. In fact, Ruben and I stood right in the middle of El Llano, which is this strange formation where we think the mid-air collision between the UFO and the small plane occurred. You can stand right there on the desert floor and look across a Mexican mountain range and see the tops of the mountains that surround Shafter, Texas.
Uh-huh.
And so it's a really spooky, coincidental sort of thing where Hollywood meets reality here. But the whole point of the movie Andromeda Strain was the fact that there was a possible biological contamination from outer space. Crashed satellite occurred in the small town, and the opening sequence of the movie where the satellite crashes down to Earth occurred, within 30 or 40 miles of where this real event, the Coyame UFO incident, is said to have occurred.
I'm trying to remember when that movie was actually put out.
That was a 1971 movie.
That's right.
Robert Wise was the director, and it was written, of course, by Michael Crichton, who had done some research when he was a medical student in graduate school. He had done research into how the U.S. government planned to deal with a possible widespread biological contamination that may have occurred, like from something falling from outer space and contaminating an area. And one of the scenarios was that a limited thermonuclear device, a small low yield device, would be used to cleanse the area, or some type of explosion would be used to cleanse the area of any biological contaminants.
Now, have you both seen, and I'm sure you have, the video footage of what was called the alien interview that was put out, and it had it was supposedly leaked, and during the interview, the alien starts hemorrhaging and
Yes.
like convulsing. Well, one of the things I found interesting about that is that it was explained about that video is that it was actually behind a glass from the people that are actually interviewing it. It not so. I couldn't remember. I can't remember exactly, but if it was not so much to protect the alien or us from the alien and whatever kind of possible diseases it might be carrying, airborne diseases, but vice versa.
I remember seeing that. It was as if it was in a enclosed room, and I used to work in hospitals there, Jack, and I remember many of our rooms that we had for infection control. We had specific rooms that control air conditioning with HEPA filters, and then we had negative pressure in order to keep, like tuberculosis and those kind of diseases, so it wouldn't spread throughout the hospital. We had special rooms like that. And so something like this, where, of course, to more of an extreme, where you may have a really dangerous situation of widespread contamination. Obviously, you need to enclose it and make sure it's not contaminated and study it.
Right. So with that, I mean, if they come across a craft like this that has been damaged, where there's, I'm sure, I mean, not only, maybe just from the fuels that power the thing, I mean, could even be toxic.
This is a very interesting topic, and one of the folks that really helped us a lot with this book and is helping us with some of our other projects is a gentleman who has publicly stated that he himself was involved in several UFO crash retrievals over about a 20-year career in the U.S. Army, and his name is Clifford Stone. And Clifford has told us about the types of things that he would see at the crash sites of some of these objects. He mentioned that there was, of course, the U.S. military that takes part in these sorts of retrievals is well prepared and technologically has everything in place to deal with any possible scenarios there. But he mentioned a number of situations that are very deadly. For example, he told us that sometimes that there is a type of energy that's released at the crash of these objects that a lot of times is residual and lasts only a short period of time. But if humans arrive at the scene very shortly after this happened, it can definitely cause a lot of damage or death in a very short period of time. Then he also talked about various mechanical things that have been found at the crashes of these objects that can also hurt people and kill people. And one of the very intriguing quotes that he gave us was, he said, and this is a direct quote, he said, "You had people die, you had people get killed, but we learned from those deaths. In short, we learned things we were doing wrong. In some cases, there was biological contamination. In other cases, there were technological things that went awry. For example, someone touched something he shouldn't have touched. It wasn't meant to be a weapon, but you and two guys could be working real close to a panel, and you see something that looks like a hologram, and you touch it, and, well, the guy next to you just simply ceases to exist. That's hard for people to understand, but these things happen." It was really an eye-opening series of interviews that Ruben and I had with Cliff.
That is pretty heavy stuff right there.
Yeah.
He was telling us that he had heard about UFO crashes along the Texas-Mexico border, and he feels, because when he was in the service himself, he was briefed on various crashes that are historical crashes that had occurred, and he remembers hearing about an incident that sounded very much like the 1974 Coyame crash, although he himself was not directly involved in that one. He says that he was involved in a number of other crash retrievals for this elite team of crash recovery military unit that he was a part of.
Now, My question is that, I mean, there's pretty good evidence pointing to, with this particular incident that collided with the plane, are these other crash incidences with other aircraft, or is there something else that's causing them to crash? I mean, there is also the theory, and I've heard this many times, that the government is even shooting these things out of the sky.
But that's also something we've been coming across in our research, going back in the 50s, and where there were orders by the military given to the Air Force, Navy, and Marines to fly and intercept these aircraft. I mean, these UFOs. And unfortunately, there were a lot of pilots that never returned. These were well-seasoned veterans from World War II and Korea, and many of these fighter pilots that engaged with the UFOs were either shot down or they just never returned, and that caused, obviously, a very big concern among our administration.
Right.
At one point, I wanted to go back, was the quarantine law that NASA also passed back in 1968, that there was a law that stated that if you touch a UFO or touch something, that you could be quarantined, basically. And again, that was for your protection, and as well as trying to stop any sort of contamination, or maybe to hide any evidence of a UFO. But and that was initiated back. The other point that Noe had brought up about what Clifford Stone shared with us is the fact that these military elite teams that would go into countries to retrieve these aircraft, they were very well prepared. I mean, they carried almost like a hazmat incident, Jack, where they have the special protection biohazardous suits. They have a whole routine of how to go about going into an area where it's dangerous, but also to go back and to retrieve the objects without endangering themselves. And again, as what Clifford was sharing, was they learned from all this experience. So we keep coming across more information. There was another incident that we connected with, the Coyame crash. This happened 8 months later in Mexico, where a private pilot, he was flying a small airplane over toward the Pacific coast of Mexico. He was taking some passengers. They belonged to a business, and when he was returning, he was being surrounded by 3 small discs. And these were approximately close to the same size as what the discs that we mentioned earlier in the Deneb report. And as these discs and the plane was being tracked, the pilot was yelling, "Mayday, Mayday, Mayday." He was contacting the air traffic controllers in Mexico City, and they were tracking this airplane, and he had also tracked the 3 UFOs around him. So one small craft actually had collided underneath his fuselage. So they were elevating his plane from 15,000 feet on up, and his plane was not pressurized, and he was concerned that he would pass out because of lack of oxygen. So for about 19 minutes, he was in a state of terror, and they sent another plane out there, and that was in the vicinity, that actually caught not only the site of the plane, but also they also identified that there were 3 objects surrounding the airplane. Well, finally, the 3 discs broke off, and they flew toward the direction of Mount Popocatépetl, the volcano, which is close to Mexico City. And then when he returned, he shared his story about what had happened to him, and this was televised, and it was on national radio, television, and their local media. Right. But this was 8 months after the Coyame crash, again dealing with a small disc.
Well, we were looking, Jack, at cases that occurred at around the same time in the same general area, and we have just been amazed by the amount of UFO activity that has been reported in that area of Mexico. Over the years, there's been all kinds of sightings. There have been photographs taken. There have been, more recently, there have been formations seen in the sky. Pilots have seen UFOs and reported them. And so there's been a high level This is not like an isolated incident in 1974, this UFO crash along the Texas-Mexico border, and that's about the only thing that's ever happened in Mexico. That's definitely not the case. In fact, the area where this crash is said to have occurred is just filled with a history of UFO incidents and UFO reports. And when the folks from the History Channel that went down there with us a few weeks ago to film on the special that they're having a special on this 1974 crash retrieval, when they went down there, they were just amazed at some of the stories that these plain, humble local people there in that area, just ranchers and just family people that live in this very isolated area of Mexico. The stories that they told just literally were knocking the socks off of these people that were down there filming. And it was just amazing. I mean, just very intriguing. And we, as the show goes along, if we have a chance, we'd like to share some of those amazing stories about some of the things that they're seeing even today in that area. For some reason, it seems to be like a magnet for paranormal activity.
I was going to say, I mean, Mexico at this particular point, and it has been for the past several years, it is a hot spot for UFO activity, and it's just increasing more and more as time goes on. That's one of the things that I've noticed just from some of the reports that, I mean, I catch some of this stuff. I mean, I talk about this stuff all the time, so I'm just amazed at how active it is within that area over anywhere else in the world at this particular point.
Well, Ruben probably can talk about the ancient Aztec and Mayan prophecies. He's a little bit more well-versed than I am in that, but there's a lot of mythology and folklore in Mexico that talks about the return of the gods from outer space and things like that. Ruben, why don't you can fill us in there a little bit?
Oh, well, yeah, in doing our research there, we were going across and looking at the folklore and the early indigenous histories of Mexico, and one of the things that really intrigued me was the codex, the dressing codex that talked about the return of the masters of the stars, and that the Mayan prophecy is that in the era of the sixth sun, all that was buried will be discovered. Truth shall be the seed of life, and the sons of the sixth sun will be the ones who travel through the stars. And so basically, what we're looking at is that the prophecies of the ancients are now are becoming true. And one of the things that was really interesting, and I used to belong to a group called Beyond Boundaries, and this was a organization headed by Joyce and Pike Murphy. And what they did was, it was a special tour group. We took people to different parts of the world where there was UFO hotspots, and they had the opportunity to be a part of this. And one of the most intriguing things that also had ran across their Jack was an interview that we did with a boy. At that time, he was about 12 years old, and his name was Claudio. And it was in 1996 that I had a chance to interview him. And basically, what he said that he and another small boy, they were herding little goats, basically up in the mountains close to the volcano, and that there was a strange light that had appeared, and then and then when the light cleared, there were three small beings, one with large heads, tight-fitting clothing, and one of them had basically a small beard. And he told the boy that they were there to protect them from the volcano. They were there to keep the volcano from erupting and to keep the others from erupting it. And then he told him, and this is really interesting. Again, this was back in 1996. Well, this happened in 1993 when he had his encounter. Now, I interviewed him in 1996, but he told the boy that there would be a small war in New York, and that this would cause the entire world to go on alert. And when I first heard that, and I had thought, is this the 1993 at first attack of the Trade Center there?
Mm-hmm.
And of course, what do we have? Of course, a small war in New York goes back to what happened in 2001 on September the 11th.
Right.
So, actually, you can catch this. We do have our website, www.beyondboundaries.org, that does talk about the. We had Unknown Universe who actually went and they had interviewed this boy, and this is back in 1996.
Mm-hmm.
And again, so we also know that that part of the country, like Noe had described, it's geographically a very isolated area, very mountainous ranges, they're very sparsely populated. But the fact that one of the thoughts was that perhaps UFOs may have a safe haven in Mexican territory because Mexico doesn't have the defenses or a large air force like the United States does in order to intercept and shoot these things down. But on the other hand, what better way to operate is to be in a safe haven and then go right into the most largest technological nation on Earth.
Yeah, yeah. Huh. You know,
so it leaves a lot of speculation, of course.
True, but I mean, well, you know, I mean, I've seen the video footages taken from some of the shuttle missions of these objects in our atmosphere. I mean, these things are taking complete right angle turns, and you know, satellites just don't do that. And there's not just one or two here or there. There's a lot of them up there. You know, so and with this this hinting at you know, the government shooting these things out of the sky, I think you're right. I think that if they were to go anywhere to kind of, I mean, that is a nice open rural area. I mean, there's nothing out there really. So to go from safe territory into hostile territory quickly, observe and get out again, I mean, it would make sense strategically for me anyway. Yes,
we're looking at again. If you're interested in taking a look at the amount of sightings that have been reported, we do carry on through our website on actually the MUFON website. There is a gentleman named Steve Richmond that has been basically documenting all the sightings throughout the United States based on the MUFON database and the UFO Reporting Center, National UFO Reporting Center, and others. You can get an idea of how many sightings are and where they're clustering at along here in the United States on a monthly basis. You'll see that there'll be a large flap, like for example in Southern California. Then the next month you'll see it in Northern California or other parts of Texas or in the East Coast. A variety of sightings. So this kind of gives you an idea, just based on the limited reports we get. But 500 is still a lot statistically for us. Who knows what's not being reported? But but if we could document that, and that's why we're working very closely with our Mexican researchers as well as the rest of Central and South America to see if there is a connection going on.
Yeah. It seems that there, at first glance, it sure seems that there is.
There's a very interesting point to be made also, Jack, that in the U.S., if you're around a group of people and you say that you're looking into UFOs, generally you get kind of strange stares, or you get the impression that they're thinking, oh, you're one of those people.
Mm-hmm.
Now, in Mexico, you say you're looking into UFOs, and people are, I mean, they don't think twice about it. I mean, to them, it's the thing that should be investigated, and there's a great amount of interest. I mean, we ran into some hardcore UFO investigators down there who put a lot of their own time and money into it with no expectation of any sort of return, just to find out more about them. The crew that we were with from the History Channel was just amazed when we met with a group of UFO investigators from all over that region of Mexico. They brought out and showed us this amazing van that they put together using their own time and resources. It's a UFO investigation van that they take out to remote locations, and it's equipped with all kinds of electronic gear and lights and sensing equipment. And the guys that we were with said that they had never seen anything like that here in the U.S.
Well, I think that the disinformation campaign that within the United States has been very effective, to the point to where that is why a lot of people kind of go, okay, UFOs. I mean, they turn it into jokes, little green men, things of that nature. So I think that if at any time, we're moving into 2008, but I think at any time, if ever, that the UFO phenomenon bursts wide open with a huge revelation that is to the entire world, I think that is going to be done by somebody in Mexico.
It could be there, Jack. Noe mentioned earlier about a lot of the stories that we were coming across, and I was just amazed. For example, one of the people that we interviewed was in charge of the Cattlemen's Association there in that part of Coyame, in that area, and he has a lot of credibility. He's respected among a number of ranchers, and he was just sharing with us about 6 or 7 types of experiences he had with he and another associate of UFOs that were flying over during the day and then at night. And then we met with the mayor and the mayor's wife, and she shared with us a story that one of the ranchers, there was only one restaurant in Coyame at this time, and she owns the restaurant, but she had told us, that this one rancher had come up to her restaurant and was sharing with her a story of where this rancher was in his home, and he was washing dishes with his wife, and he noticed that the area outside was changing color, and he looked out the window and saw objects that were coming in and out of some large holes or caves that is in his property that are very deep. And of course he freaked out, and his wife says, "Don't worry about it. They frequently come in and out, and don't worry, there's no harm to you. They won't harm us." So obviously we want to go back and, pardon me?
She had seen the phenomena before, and when she mentioned this to us, it was at the end of our filming on the Coyame show that we were doing. Dr. Ronnie Milioni was with us as part of the cast for the new series UFO Road Trip on the History Channel, and his jaw just dropped about 5 inches when the mayor's wife started talking about this incident. It was just the most amazing thing. The whole crew gathered round as she told us the story. I was doing the translating, right, Ruben?
Yes, you were.
I was doing the translating for her. And even as I was formulating the words to translate from her Spanish to English, I couldn't believe the words that I was saying, as I was translating it.
Right.
She described it in vivid detail, these strange orbs shooting up out of the ground, and the underlying feeling that everybody got there is that there must be some sort of underground base or operation of some kind out here in the middle of this the Chihuahuan desert, in that area where we were investigating.
Well, correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't there also a large number of sightings of water-based UFOs? I mean, these things coming up out of the water in the Gulf of Mexico as well?
Well, yes. There's been reports of UFOs, or what they call USOs, underwater submersible objects that are being seen throughout the planet. I mean, our planet's about approximately 70% water, and of course in the Gulf of Mexico, along the Caribbean. I was in Puerto Rico there, Jack, twice, back in 1994, in 2000. There's a mysterious lake called Laguna Cartagena where we had interviewed people where they've seen objects coming in and out of that lake. But what's interesting was, and this is something that that we came across in our research, there's a blimp, an aerostat blimp, that is hoisted up, and it's basically, they say it has radar devices and that. They say it's used to track any sort of drug smuggling coming into the island.
Mm-hmm.
But what's interesting, and Noe had mentioned this a little earlier, we find that the same type of aerostat, the same blimp, also happens to be along the Texas border, close to the 3 UFO crashes that had occurred back in from the 40s and 70s.
Huh.
And so, yeah, it's interesting. So the amount of reports that we get with underwater UFOs, but there you see that connection again, the surveillance blimps.
Right.
And that's in our book there. So we have a chapter devoted to that.
Very, very interesting. So it's safe to say, I mean, going back just a little bit, that these incidents of actually recovering these crashed discs is more common than we really know. It sounds.
There are a lot of reports of objects crashing from outer space, crashing down to the Earth, and we know, as Clifford Stone has explained to us, he himself was involved in, he says that he was involved in 12 UFO crash retrievals during his 20 years in the U.S. military. He says that the way he explained it to us is that there are a lot of reports of objects crashing from outer space, and a lot of them are objects that have a conventional explanation.
Mm-hmm.
For example, space junk of one kind or another, meteorites and things like that.
Right.
But then there's also a part of these that are non-conventional objects, such as he was involved in retrieving. And it doesn't happen as commonly as some UFO researchers would lead people to believe, but there have been a number of very credible and well-documented cases of non-conventional objects coming in from outer space and crashing down and being retrieved. And among these objects, we think that the incident in Coyame, Chihuahua, Mexico, has to be one of the foremost, based on what we're finding out about it, and it's still, as I mentioned earlier, very much in the early stages of research, and is still requiring a lot more investigating into it.
I don't know how much time before our next break there, Jack, but when both Noe and I had gone out to Coyame, there were 2 areas that we went to investigate. One was a hole that had a number of mysterious parts from vehicles, and the other was an actual crash site of an airplane.
Mm-hmm.
So we came across those two sites there. And when is your next break? I want to.
We have about 15 minutes before our next break.
Oh, okay, cool. And we can get right into it. But maybe Noe, if you want to share first about
we were just amazed to find Ruben and I on our first trip. We were in Mexico, in Coyame, in a small town of 611 population. We were talking to the local people. We made contact with a lady who works with the city government there, and she's kind of like the PR person. And then we made contact with a lady who was interviewed by the crew that did the Mexico's Roswell episode for the History Channel in 2005, who's been extremely helpful to us, Soledad Bryant, who lived in the U.S. For most of her life and speaks excellent English, but is also born and raised there in Coyame and is very familiar with the area and its people. And anyway, we got leads from the local people about this mysterious site just outside of town, just northwest of town. 2 mysterious sites, actually. There was a strange pit in the ground that none of the local people knew anything about. And it was, when they took us out there, we wanted to go see it and take pictures of it. So they took us out there, and we found this. It looks kind of like a vertical straight down shaft into the ground is surrounded by about a 30-foot diameter circle of blackened earth or blackened dirt. And within that blackened dirt is just all kinds of metallic debris and little pieces of metal scattered all around that. When during this last visit that we made down there with the production crew from the History Channel, Dr. Ronnie Milioni, who is the scientific/technical advisor as well as a cast member, was making some very interesting comments about how the soil around this pit has totally different characteristics from the soil farther away, and also the vegetation. There appears to have been some kind of marked event, or some kind of event occurred here that changed the composure, the composition of the soil, and the surrounding vegetation. Not only that, but they took along with them equipment to measure. They took along a Geiger counter to measure radioactivity in the site. And as soon as they stuck the probe down into this pit, the needle just jumped. I mean, it was just a dramatic jump in the level of radioactivity. So what Milioni and his team did was they collected a lot of soil samples all in the area, and as well as a lot of the metallic debris. Ruben and I got some of the metallic debris ourselves that we brought along with us. But even even more interesting than this first site, about a mile farther down the road, also northwest of the small town of Coyame, we found a debris field from the crash of a small airplane circa late 1970s. It's been identified through studying some of the pieces of the wreckage. So there on the desert floor, just about 5 miles northwest of the tiny town of Coyame, is this airplane crash. We found pieces of the rudder. We found pieces of the frame of the airplane. We found a lot of U.S. coins from the 60s and early 70s there. And the locals tell us that there was a plane crash. There was a plane crash. The military came in and took all the evidence away. They wouldn't let anybody near the crash site. And so they don't have much information about the history of that plane crash. They know that a plane crashed and they were kept away by the authorities from that area. And Ruben might want to bring in more detail about that. But that, in essence, those two very strange sites that we visited that we feel may be related to the 1974 Coyame UFO incident.
Well, one of the things that we found was that the state of Chihuahua is broken down into a number of two major military jurisdictions, one close to the capital, Chihuahua City, and the other is Ojinaga, which is the border town across from Presidio. And what we were finding through our research is that that part of Mexico, I mean, there's a lot of dirt trails, dirt roads, basically. And we believe that the convoy that was, we mentioned earlier, may have originated from the fort, or from the Mexican military base in Ojinaga. And what we found through other research was through some documentation from, you're probably familiar with Mr. Jaime Malzahn.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, he had a group of his investigators that had also gone down into to Coyame, and one of the things that we found that was quite interesting is that a number of these folks come to Coyame, but you have to go way out to the outskirts. There's a small little ranches that are miles apart. We found that people who had lived there may have left, may have gone to the United States or moved to other parts of Mexico. So trying to find witnesses back in that time, we were very fortunate finding this gentleman that Noe had mentioned about his experience back in 1974. But what researchers tend to do, they'll go to a little town and start asking people, but what they realize is that, you know, a lot of these folks aren't familiar with what had occurred.
Right.
But what we've found was that that by doing this investigation, with Jaime Maussan's crew, they went to look at archives back in the city of Chihuahua, and they found that there were some mysterious truck accidents where there were a number of Mexican soldiers that were killed that fell right within that time period that the event had occurred back in 1974. We were wondering, is this part of a cover-up to explain why the soldiers had died? And one of the things we found out too was that in that area, it's heavily patrolled by Mexican small army units, and
we were stopped several times during our investigation. It was quite frightening, actually.
Yeah,
you know, the entire the bus we were on with the cast and crew from the History Channel was stopped by this guys with machine guns. And we
had machine guns aiming at us. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
We had all this stuff with us that we had recovered from the crash site and from the crash site of the small airplane, and we were really concerned that they would hassle us and you know. So there were some tense moments. There were some really tense moments. They had the machine guns pointed basically right at us, and Ruben's been there 3 times. I've been there twice, and each time we have gone, we have encountered a military presence way out in the middle of this desert where very few people live. There's this military presence out of the army base in Ojinaga. So, you know, obviously this military presence there indicates that that was the same sort of presence that likely was in place in 1974.
Oh yeah, definitely. So they're kind of, I mean, that'd lead me to believe they're kind of keeping an eye on you two.
Well, you know, we have to be real careful. Obviously, any researcher that goes into another country, you don't have your rights.
Yeah.
You're basically so. You know, that's something we have to be very careful about, and that's why we work through a network as well with our other contacts in Mexico.
The interesting thing about it is that the soldiers themselves are fascinated and intrigued by the topic of UFOs because we engage them in conversations about what we're doing, and they immediately focus on the topic at hand. You know, when we tell them we're doing UFO research, then they turn around and start talking to us and telling us these amazing stories about things that they've seen at the various checkpoints there in the area that they worked and while making their rounds. That's the most amazing part about it. You know,
yeah,
Ruben, go ahead.
Go ahead. No, I remember, our bus, there was the Jeep, these soldiers had jumped off their Jeep, and they were pointing their rifles at us, and then one of the, I believe he was a sergeant, he came right into our bus, and he was saying, well, we're here to stop any sort of intervention of drug smuggling. This is part of our operation. So he just started walking down the end of our bus and then he was just looking at the guys that were there, and then we struck a conversation with him, and then I had asked him, well, he's asked us what we were doing, told him that we were doing a documentary on UFOs and this and that. Well, then he sat down in one of the bus seats and starts telling us about his experience that he's seen UFOs when he was a kid over at school on the east coast of Mexico. And then I asked him, well, would it be possible if we can interview on this? And he says,
no.
I can't do that. Yeah.
No. That'll be my job, he said. That'll be my job.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah, he says, I have to get permission from the top in order for me to be interviewed by you. But off the record, he was just telling us his experience.
Oh, so yeah. You know, once he got relaxed, and this has happened at several occasions at these military checkpoints, once they realize that you're not a threat, you're not doing anything improper, then they start talking about their own UFO experiences.
Mm-hmm.
And these guys that we were with from the History Channel, you know, they had not been subjected to this kind of military strong arm inspection type of process. So
Yeah.
they were all very, very, very nervous about it. After the soldiers left the bus, I turned around and asked if anybody needed to change their pants or anything back in the back of the bus.
Yeah.
But I think everybody survived it.
Right. Well, you know what? We're going to stop you right there. We're going to take a quick break. But when we come back, I'd like to hear some of these stories and these reports that people have passed on to you of what they're seeing. And the reason being is because I grew up in Albuquerque, New Mexico. I've spent time in Texas. I've spent time in the entire area of the Southwest, and I'll tell you, there's when you see a meteor, when you see just space junk falling from the sky, and when you see military planes. I mean, I grew up right next to Kirkland Air Force Base. I've seen them many, many times, but you also know when you see something that you just can't explain, that is outside of all that.
You're probably familiar with the Martha lights too, huh, Jack?
Oh yeah, most definitely.
We'll share our story with you when we get back from the break.
Hold it right there. We'll be right back. This is 99.7 FM in Chicago, 104.1 in St. Louis. Streaming live on the web at WPRTradio.com. This show is Paranormal Radio. I am Captain Jack, and tonight we are talking all about UFOs. Stick around. Don't go away.
You are listening to WPRTradio.com. And now, once again, your host of Paranormal Radio, Captain Jack.
Indeed, that's me. Welcome back, everybody. This is Paranormal Radio. I'm your host, Captain Jack, here for the next, about 45 minutes or so. Tonight's guests are talking about Roswell, or Mexico's Roswell. Very, very interesting story. I think it's even more interesting and more intriguing than Roswell itself, actually. Welcome back, gentlemen.
Hello.
Hey, thank you, Jack.
A couple questions, and this one's kind of been on my mind, talking about this. In this report, when they recovered this craft, it was described as a disc, yes?
Yes.
Yes, uh-huh.
And you're familiar with Bob Lazar's and his information or his claim that he had actually worked for the United States government of back engineering alien spacecraft, where they didn't have one or two, they had several of these things.
Mm-hmm. Right, I recall the sports model.
Exactly, the sports model. Now, in the description, I don't know how detailed the report was on the disc that they actually recovered in the crash, but do the descriptions kind of match in a sense?
Oh, that's a good question. In terms of this in the Denham report, it pointed out the actual dimensions of the craft, mentioning that it was 16 feet in diameter, 5 feet in height. Mm-hmm. I remember the Bob Lazar mentioning about a small craft, a smaller craft, and then, of course, he mentioned also that in the other craft, I remember him talking about observing the controls and the equipment and the chairs that were actually a lot smaller.
Right.
And so that is a good question to see whether there is a connection. Of course, when we talked about the pilot, his name Carlos de los Santos, and he described the craft over his airplane, and they were approximately about the same size. So that's where, again, when we're doing our research, we make these connections. And I forgot to mention, I don't know if we have a chance, but we wanted to make sure that for the listeners out there, we do have a website. It's called www.mexicosroswell.com. That's without the apostrophe. And if folks are interested in getting our book, they could definitely look on our website there.
Indeed. And Jimmy actually has on our website, WPRTradio.com, in the category of tonight's guests, we have a link there. So anyone out there that's actually browsing our website, if you take a look, you'll see it, www.mexicosroswell.com, and that'll take you in to the website where you can find out more information and find out how to get your hands on the book about this as well.
Jack, I wanted to jump in for a moment, if I could, about the Lazar thing and the connection with other similar type of craft that may have been in the process of being reverse engineered by U.S. intelligence agents. One of the interesting and intriguing theories that Ruben and I have kind of discussed about the Coyame incident in 1974 is that, and people have asked us, is there a possibility that the craft that crashed there in northern Mexico in 1974 might have been an unconventional aircraft that was being tested by U.S. intelligence that might have been designed after or patterned after a UFO that has been retrieved in a previous...
A drone.
That's a very intriguing question.
Indeed.
It's certainly, we've had reports and we've looked at a lot of documents that suggest that the U.S. has tested this type unconventional aircraft in the past that may have been patterned after these UFOs. So that certainly could be a possibility that that may have happened.
And I want to touch on this just briefly. When many people think of crashed UFOs, they think of, well, first and foremost, they think of Roswell, 1947. And I think that was the very first time that UFOs actually crashed. But that's not true, because back in, 1897 in Aurora, Texas.
That's right, the late 1800s.
Yeah, that
right around the turn of the century.
Yeah, and that one is extremely baffling, but that might be the very first documented, and correct me if I'm wrong, documented UFO crash.
It's interesting. Right around that time frame, right in 1897 or so, there was reports of a mysterious airship that was being seen. That was seen here in Northern California, there, Jack. And then this same object was also being reported out there in the Midwest. And this was back in around that time frame there. So there may be a connection between that and Aurora, Texas.
And on that one, they say that the pilot of that craft was buried in that cemetery. Isn't that right?
I recall that in the documentary where they're trying to get access to, I believe it's next to a well shaft, I believe. And they want to get down into excavating and hopefully see what they could find.
That would be something, wouldn't it? They actually found something that's out of this world.
Yeah, there have been a number of UFO crashes that seem to have a lot of legitimacy to them over the years. When we were talking to retired U.S. Army Sergeant Clifford Stone, who he claims to have taken part in a number of top-secret UFO crash retrieval cases in the 50s, 60s, and early 70s. He said that he told us that he himself was familiar with maybe 12 to 15 cases of actual UFO crashed material that had been picked up and recovered from a crash site. So there's been, it seems, there's been the potential for this material to be studied, and some of the technologies employed to perhaps be replicated to some extent. Although this is, it's debatable how much could be taken from something that is so highly advanced, way beyond our own present-day technology. A lot of people feel that it would be like handing a cell phone to someone living, say, in the 16th century.
Right.
Given the materials they had and the technologies they had at their disposal back then, what could they do with it? I mean, how could they possibly begin to reverse engineer a cell phone back in the 16th century?
Right.
But to some extent, if we find some processes or some technologies that are similar to what we have in place today, then perhaps some of it could be some advances could be made to our existing technologies. But there would be limits as to how far it could actually be replicated.